Hello everybody, A&P students. It is time to continue our passage through the central nervous system. Last lecture we had finished up the brain. So we're sticking in the CNS, we're staying in the dorsal body cavity, and we're going to do the spinal cord. I know we've talked about it generally here and there. So let's get into a little more anatomical detail today. Before we do that, though, some basic functions of the spinal cord. It is going to transmit information, so sensory information from your body to your brain. It's going to take motor commands from your brain to your body. It is also going to be a center of integration, of processing information. So those are the three big functions. Now, as far as transmitting information goes, if we look at a slice of the spinal cord, we're going to see a lot of ascending tracts. A tract is a bundle of axons in the cord or the brain. So we have a lot of ascending tracts, all the guys in blue here. They're taking sensory information up from the body to the brain. We're not going to try and remember all their names, don't worry. And then we've also got descending tracts, the red ones, taking motor commands from the brain down to the body. That's the basic way this works. As far as the integration, the most integration the spinal cord is involved in is reflexes. Have you done lab number 20 yet? Lab number 20 is all about reflexes. A reflex is a rapid, automatic, predictable response to a stimulus. And there are reflexes that are kind of obvious, like if you poke somebody with a pin, pain receptors send sensory information to the spinal cord. The spinal cord is going to make the quote-unquote decision whether or not to tell a motor neuron to contract a muscle to elicit a response. This is a very basic reflex. The integration is happening on the level of the spinal cord. Like if you touch a hot stove, if you touch a hot pan on the stove, say you're cooking some scrambled eggs and you, for some reason, put your hand right in the pan. You will pull that hand back before your brain even knows it's hot, because the integration of that reflex happened at the level of the spinal cord. So that's pretty important, wouldn't you agree? Now, also, there are a lot of reflexes involved with normal movement and balance. And the spinal cord is going to integrate those, make a decision on those, which is helpful in terms of the time. And like the withdrawal reflex for the hot pan example, that's helpful in terms of the time. We don't have to wait for the signal to get all the way up to that brain before we can cause a response. All right. So we got some basic functions. Let's talk about the protection of the spinal cord, and then we'll talk about its anatomy. So the spinal cord is protected by three major things: bones, meninges, and cerebrospinal fluid. The bones, of course, are the vertebrae. Here we have a beautiful cervical vertebra right here. The spinal cord is ensconced within the vertebral canal, protected by the body of the vertebra, by the vertebral arch, and all the sticky out processes. So, what about those meninges? The meninges are the three membranes surrounding the cord. They are the pia, the arachnoid, and the dura mater. That's from inside to outside. There's my pia mater right there on the cord itself. Go a little farther out, you get the arachnoid mater right there, the white one, and then this grayish one is the dura mater. They're all connective tissue membranes, and they go from really, really loose to a little bit denser to quite dense. And they pad the brain. So those are our meninges. Don't forget that the spinal cord only has a one-layered dura mater, whereas the brain has a two-layered dura mater. So keep that somewhere in your brain. Okay, excellent. If we look at a little diagram, some of my beautiful artwork here. Not the bony part, but the four circles. I really shouldn't be too proud of this, I guess. But in this diagram, red is pia, Green is arachnoid, and the purple-ish, dark bluish, I don't even know what color that is, dark blue, is dura mater. Now, there are actually two spaces we have to be aware of. There is the subarachnoid space, which is between the pia and the dura, and then there is the epidural space, which is outside of the dura mater. I'm not even sure if I spoke correctly. Pia and arachnoid, in there, that's where we find the subarachnoid space. Don't even know if I made a mistake on what I said there. Anyhow, what do we find in these spaces? In the subarachnoid space, we're going to find cerebrospinal fluid. In the epidural space, we're going to find a lot of fat. Why would we have fat there? It's not for energy storage. It's not for, thermal insulation. What's it for? If you said padding, shock absorption, protection, anything along those lines, good job. Way to go. So a lot of fat. We have blood vessels out here in the epidural space as well. Okay, if we look at some histology, you can see how skinny the pia is, really loose connective tissue. Here's the spinal cord over here. Spinal cord on the left. The white stands for white matter, so spinal white matter. Then the pia matter is right here. The arachnoid gets a little thicker, but still not that thick. But then the dura is just crazy thick, crazy thick. In this particular slide, the blueness indicates the abundance of collagen. So you can just see how much collagen is in that dura matter, which is going to make it really durable. Dura, right, means tough. Pia means gentle. Arachnoid means spider-like, because it often has a cobwebby appearance. The matter part means mother. It's kind of a long story on how that word got to be used to name these connective tissue ligaments. Anyhow, don't worry about the three things in the middle for now. We'll get to a few of them later. Okay, CSF, we're going to find it in that subarachnoid space, which is this light bluish region right here. Subarachnoid space is between the arachnoid, this white line here, and the pia, this kind of dark line on the brain itself. The CSF is made in all four ventricles. So the lateral ventricle's up here, third ventricle here, fourth ventricle here. The CSF is made at capillary beds called choroid plexuses. The CSF flows from the lateral ventricles to the third, down the aqueduct to the fourth, then out the apertures in the fourth ventricle. We see one right there, to get into the subarachnoid space where it surrounds and supports the brain, the spinal cord, protects, buffers as well. Remember, buffering is, if you go back to your chemistry class, buffering is a way we resist changes in pH. We want homeostasis all around. Then, of course, recall the CSF is reabsorbed into these dural venous sinuses. We see one nicely up here at these little arachnoid villi. So the CSF surrounds the cord ever so nicely. All right, and with that, folks, we are done with all the protective things. So let us do the anatomy of the spinal cord. It runs, in terms of bony landmarks, it runs from the foramen magnum all the way up here, all the way down to the level of L1. Okay? So it's not as long as the whole column, right? The spinal cord doesn't go down into L2, L3, L4, L5, doesn't go down to the sacrum, doesn't go down into the coccyx. The spinal cord stops at L1. Notice that there are nerves coming out the whole way. Cervical spinal nerves coming out of the cervical part, thoracic coming out of the thoracic part. Then the lumbar spinal nerves come out right here, but they have to go down and out, down and out. The sacral spinal cords start right here, and they got to go way down and out, way down and out. The coccygeal nerve starts right here and goes all the way straight down and out. So the cord doesn't extend the entire length, below the cord, we have the last groups of spinal nerves. Okay, speaking of spinal nerves, there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. There are 31 segments of the spinal cord that give rise to these nerves. There are 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, and 5 sacral, and then 1 coccygeal. So 5 and 5 is 10, 11, and 12 is 23, and 8 is 31. Kind of makes sense. 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae, originally 5 sacral vertebrae. You have 1 coccyx as an adult. Now you have 7 cervical vertebrae, but 8 nerves. That's because there's a nerve sneaking out both above and below C1. Okay. All right. Let's keep on going. Oh, there's a dermatome map. We looked at this in lab. If you did that lab already, what, lab number 18? No, 19. Yeah, if you did lab number 19 already, we looked at this. A dermatome map tells me what spinal cord segment and what spinal nerve pairs correspond to what regions of the body. So if you poke yourself in, where are you going to poke yourself? You poke yourself in the thumb, spinal nerve C6 is going to take that information back to the spinal cord segment at C6. So this dermatome map lets us know where in the body, how the body regions correspond to the spinal cord. You are not going to try and memorize this at all. It kind of makes sense though. Cervical is in the neck, upper chest, shoulders, down most of the arm, hand, fingers. Thoracic is in the torso, right? Chest, abdomen, back, a little bit of the arm as well. Lumbar, lower back, pretty much the whole front of the leg, top of the foot, bottom of the foot, inside, outside the leg too. Sacral, external genitalia in the pubic region, gluteal region, then basically like right down the back of the leg. Notice this person has no face because cranial nerves will be responsible for the face, whereas spinal nerves are responsible for the rest of the body. Oh, I got bad news for you. We are not going to learn the names of all 31 spinal nerves. We're going to learn some nerves, but nowhere near all 31. Now, when we are looking at the spinal cord, we are going to notice that it has a swelling in the cervical region called the cervical enlargement. We can see that up here. And a swelling in the lumbar region called the lumbar enlargement. We can see that down here. This is because these two regions are going to control your limbs. Okay, cervical enlargement is going to have a lot to do with the movement and sensation of your upper limbs. You have a lot of movement and a lot of sensation in your upper limb, so you're going to need a lot of cell bodies in that part of the cord. Similar thing for the lumbar enlargement. You're going to have a lot of movement and sensation in your lower limbs, so you're going to need a lot of neuronal cell bodies in the cord at that point. All right. We already said the spinal cord comes down and ends at around L1, and it ends at this tapering region. This tapering, narrowing part of the spinal cord is called the conus medullaris. Conus meaning cone, and medullaris because it's meaning like marrow, like on the inside. Now, that tapering region, we see it over here as well. So that means the spinal cord ends well before the column. And so that means the lumbar and sacral and coccygeal spinal nerves have to go down before they go out. They go down before they go out. And that collection of spinal nerves in that lower vertebral canal is known as the cauda equina. So it's called the cauda equina because some anatomist a long time ago thought it resembled the tail of a horse. Okay. From the conus medullaris, there is this strand of pia matter that extends all the way down to the posterior coccyx. We see it highlighted in green here, and that is called the phylum terminale. Oh, by the way, check out how nicely you can see the lumbar enlargement and the cervical enlargement in this particular rendering. All right, so we're done the kind of longitudinal anatomy. We're going to take a look at some cross-sectional anatomy now. We got a cross-section of our cord here. By the way, check out the fat in the epidural space. See that fat in the epidural space there? We mentioned that earlier. In the spinal cord cross-section, we are going to see a big indentation in the front called the anterior median fissure. Fissures are big, so front, middle, big groove, anterior median fissure. In the back, we have a much narrower, shallower groove called the posterior median sulcus, the back middle groove. Now, the cord itself has a grayish H or butterfly made of gray matter. So you're going to find your somata there, which means you do your integration there. You do your integration in that gray H. We're also going to find dendrites and some unmyelinated axons in there too. Then surrounding my gray butterfly is white matter, which is composed of myelinated axons, which means that's where the information is going up and down. The sensory information in the ascending tracts, the motor commands in the descending tracts. All right. Moving right along, we can start labeling some more. The white matter is going to have columns. They're also called funiculi. That was the word I used in lab. That's the word in your lab manual. What word do you like better, funiculi or columns? I'm guessing you're saying columns, and I get that. We got to know both, though. So there is a dorsal funiculus or column in the back. There is a lateral funiculus or column on the side, and a ventral funiculus or column in the front. And then if we're talking about the gray butterfly on each side can have 2 or 3 horns depending on where in the cord we are. There's always a horn in the back called the dorsal horn. There's always a horn in the front called the ventral horn. And in the thoracic and upper lumbar spine, there is a lateral horn as well. And we're going to talk more about these horns in a bit. Now, linking the two sides, the two wings of the butterfly, is this narrow band of gray tissue called the gray commissure. And within it is a passageway called the central canal, which contains CSF and is continuous with the fourth ventricle, which remember is between the brainstem and the cerebellum. Okay, we are doing fantastic today. I think this might be kind of a short one today. Here we see the funiculi again, posteriors in the back, lateral in the side, anterior in the front. If there weren't these labels, posterior, lateral, anterior, could you be able to tell this was the front? If there wasn't the label here, how could you tell this was the front? How do I know from looking at it this is the front? Send me your answer. That's your bonus question of the day. Here we see those tracks that we mentioned earlier. So ascending tends to be in the back. It's kind of a mix on the sides and a mix in the front. Cool. As far as the gray matter goes, okay, we got to talk about those horns. And remember, we have 3 potential horns. Dorsal. Notice how dorsal gets an S as the second letter here. Dorsal horn is entirely sensory. That is where information is coming in. Notice how the lateral horn has an M as a second word, and the ventral horn has an M as a second word, or second letter. That's because the lateral and ventral horns are totally motor. So motor commands going out. So dorsal horn, sensory coming in, sensory afferent dorsal. How's this class make you feel? Sad. Sensory afferent dorsal. Lateral and ventral horns are both motor. Now, there's also these other letters. The S here and the V here are standing for somatic and visceral. So somatic sensory neurons tend to end in kind of this back part of the dorsal horn. Remember, somatic sensory is going to be things like touch, proprioception. Visceral sensory, that means we're coming from, like the intestines, the heart, the lung, the organs in your body, in your ventral body cavity. They tend to end a little bit closer to the front. Now, motor neurons in the lateral horn, you're going to find the somata and the dendrites here, and then the axons zoom on out this way. And they're going to be visceral motor neurons. Visceral means they're autonomic neurons. So we got motor neurons going to autonomic things. What are the three autonomic effectors? Cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, glands. Whereas in the ventral horn, we're going to find the dendrites and somata of somatic motor neurons. And then their axons go out this way. And where are their axons going? Somatic motor neurons. Where are their axons going? They are going to skeletal muscle. And we see on this side, we see the axons coming out for the motor guys, and the axons going in for the sensory guys. Notice we have these big bundles of axons, both dorsal and ventral. This guy is a dorsal root right here, bundle of sensory axons. This dude is a ventral root, a bundle of motor axons. Those two roots fuse to form a mixed structure called a spinal nerve. It's mixed because it's got the sensory ones going in and the motor ones going out. Okay. Excellent. Speaking of nerves, we just looked at that spinal nerve. We just introduced ourselves to it. I want to do the basic structure of a nerve right now, because this is going to be important to have in our brains as we move forward. So a nerve is a big old bundle of axons. So all of these yellowish cylinders with the little blue interior are representing our axons, okay? The single axon is actually really skinny. You don't even see the single axon when you're looking down here. The blue represents the Schwann cells that make up the myelin sheath. And then around those Schwann cells, we are going to find a loose connective tissue wrapping called the endoneurium. And that endoneurium is going to protect the axon and Schwann cells, but also bind one axon and its Schwann cells to its neighbor. So we get all these guys attached to one another by the endoneurium. And then when we have a bundle of axons like this, we call it a fascicle, and we wrap it with a denser bit of connective tissue called the perineurium. So you can see the perineurium around this fascicle right here. And then we bundle several, so here we got 1, 2, 3, 4 fascicles and an artery and a vein. We bundle all that together with a pretty tough, thick layer of connective tissue, pretty dense layer of connective tissue called the epineurium. And that entire structure is a nerve. So when we get to that spinal nerve and nerves branching from it, what we're referring to is a bundle of axons with these 3 connective tissue investments. And guys, we are going to quit here. This is going to be a nice short lecture. So, hope it was good. Hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. I always do. And on that note, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.